From the EPR Creation Studio, well, actually, no, from the road, around Thanksgiving holiday, this is Unconquered with Doc Staples. As always, this podcast brought to you by EPR Creations, bringing you the best of internet marketing and website development for an affordable price. By Shenandoah Newsma of Shen Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina. By Louis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida. By Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida. And by Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Okay, y'all, look, this is our final game preview of the season, this time of another rivalry game. Florida State, coming up on Saturday evening. And look, y'all, I don't really know what to tell you about this in terms of what to expect. I think everybody who's watched Florida State this season knows that against FBS competition, things are unlikely to look great. And it's hard to believe that we're here. I mean, given where this year started, Florida State 1 game removed from a 19-game win streak. Florida coming in where it was anybody's guess whether Billy Napier would actually survive the season. And here we are. Florida's going to go to a bowl. They went 4-4 in the SEC. They beat Kentucky and a pretty good Ole Miss team. And they've steadily gotten better over the course of the season. Now, they've been horrible on the road under Billy Napier, but guess what? It's barely a road game this time. I'm not sure how much of a home field Florida State's going to have in this one, given, again, the stadium renovations and everything have impacted that this season. And then the way that Florida State's played, Doak Campbell has been a nice home field for everybody else. So it is what it is. But the biggest thing is, I think, again, the quarterback position really is where Florida has taken a step forward, and that's because DJ Lagway, the true freshman, who everybody knew coming out of high school was a pretty close to ready-made guy. One of those, nobody's a can't-miss guy. I mean, you get some guys that are close. The elf at Clemson was pretty much can't-miss. There's some of those guys, but Lagway was pretty close. Everybody knew that he was going to be really good, and he took over after an injury to Graham Mertz, and he's been pretty good. Only time he's lost in the 5 games he started was against Georgia, and he's been solid. And he makes multiple wow throws per game. He's been a dynamic player in terms of being able to avoid sacks and everything else. I mean, just to put it in perspective, he's made 16 big-time throws and 5 turnover-worthy plays so far this season. That's 11% of his throws that have been big-time throws on the season. That's a high figure. If you compare that to Florida State's Luke Kromenhoek, who is going to be the starter for this one, Luke Kromenhoek has 7 big-time throws and 3 turnover-worthy plays, 12.1% big-time throw and 3% turnover-worthy play percentage. But the primary difference has been, or a couple differences here in terms of comparing the 2 freshman quarterbacks, has been really the pressure and then the sack rate, how well they've avoided sacks, and then, of course, whether or not their passes are actually caught once they throw it. Lagway's pressure to sack rate, is a respectable 17%. So that puts him in the same territory as Dylan Raiola, as Connor Wegman, Cam Ward, Noah Fafita, Carson Beck, a bunch of those guys in that 17% rate, so 17% area. So that's roughly 17% of the time that he is pressured, he gets sacked. Luke Kromenhoek, on the other hand, his pressure to sack ratio is 42.5%, which is the worst in the country for among players who have had 50 or more pass attempts. Down below him, you have Nico Marchiol, or I don't know how you pronounce that, from West Virginia, 40%, and Jackson Arnold at 30.5%. So that tells you how astronomically high that 42.5% is for Kromenhoek. And that's what that tells you, is that that's a guy who's not processing super fast and he's not getting the ball out. And now the other thing is he's also getting pressured pretty quickly. He's Kromenhoek is getting pressured right away, as we know. But again, you're looking at the pressure to sack ratio, or pressure to sack rate, not good for Kromenhoek. Actually pretty respectable, especially for a freshman, for what you see from Lagway. And really that's where it all starts for Florida, is because Lagway, and then the fact that they actually catch the football generally when he throws it, have allowed them to then build on what really has been their strength on the season, and that's running the football. And, they've got a big offensive line. They've been reasonably successful in terms of running the football, and that's really what Florida State's going to have to stop. The problem is Florida State has been very bad at stopping the run on the season. So, looking at the numbers here, Florida has been putting up 4.32 yards per carry. You look at some of the games that they've played against decent competition. They ran for 6.65 yards per carry against LSU, 4.8 yards per carry at Texas, 3.05 or 3.03 against Georgia, 4.58 against Kentucky, 6.28 yards per carry against Mississippi State. These are all very, very healthy numbers. And, 4.96 against Miami in that opener. Even though they got blown out in that opener, they were able to run the football reasonably well in that opener. And they've been able to break some games open by running the football, by pounding the rock. Now, I say 4.32 is actually reasonably acceptable as a number, and they've stuck with it on the season. Here's the problem. Florida State's giving up 4.51 yards per carry on the season, which is even more than Florida's been averaging. So now you're playing against a team that wants to pound the football, that has been able to do that at different points, and that's been the thing that Florida State has struggled to stop. I don't see any reason to expect that to change in this game. I haven't seen a whole lot of reason that Jaden Ball and Montrell Johnson are guys that are not going to have success against Florida State's run defense. And to me, that's really where this game, sort of the rubber meets the road, at least on the Florida State defensive side of the ball. Now, I do think FSU should be able to limit what Lagway and that passing game are able to do. They're going to center on Elijah Badger. He's the transfer from Arizona State. He's been their best overall player in the passing game. They're not super dynamic out there. I think Florida State's secondary should be able to handle those guys reasonably well. The problem is that if you can't stop the run, not much else is going to matter. And I think at this point, I would expect Florida to be able to run the football comparably to how they ran it against LSU, comparably to how they ran it, say, against Mississippi State. So, Mississippi State, 36 carries for 226 yards, 6.28 yards per carry. And unless Randy Shannon completely inspires that defense and they change up a little bit of what they're doing in terms of being able to defend the run, I just don't see a whole lot of reason to expect much different from Florida State here. Look, the personnel is there to where if you commit, if those guys play with their hair on fire, yeah, Darrell Jackson, Josh Farmer, some of these guys could decide to play with a little bit of pride, and all of a sudden you're looking at something closer to what you got against Miami, which is 28 carries for 139 yards. And if Florida State gives up under 150 yards rushing in this game, they've got a real chance to win the game. I'll just say that. If they're giving up, say, less than 5 yards per carry and under 150 yards on the ground, This is going to be a game that that is winnable for Florida State. But again, I'm not super, super confident that that can happen. Now, on the other side of the football, Florida's been pretty average in terms of stopping the run. Mississippi, 4.0 yards per carry. Texas, 6.77 yards per carry. Miami, 4.36. So they've been average to, okay in stopping the run. And when they've played against teams that aren't real good at running the football, like LSU, 2.91 yards per carry. When they played against teams that are really good running the football, they've given up yardage. Well, Florida State's been real bad running the football. So to me, this game basically rests on the arm of Luke Kromenhoek. I think you're going to have to expect that Florida State's going to put the game in Kromenhoek's hands to win or lose. The problem is, again, you've got to have some receivers who are going to catch it and demonstrate that they're ready to go. Now, last game, you started to see some guys actually come on. You started to see Kromenhoek start to gain some comfort in this game, or in that game, in the final 2.5 quarters or so. But the question is, how much of that was just getting up to speed in that game versus actually figuring some things out? If that can carry forward, if they can actually complete some passes, if they can get into any sort of rhythm in the passing game, this all of a sudden is one of those throw the record books out rivalry games where Florida State has a chance. But again, I keep coming back to that pressure versus sack rating or ratio, and you look at the rate of over 40%, 42% of pressures wind up in sacks when Kromenhoek's been on the field. That's a real problem. And for those of you who are wondering, Brock Glenn has played quite a few snaps for Florida State as well. Brock Glenn, same figure, 21.4%, which is a whole lot better in terms of sack rate. And that's been the biggest difference between he and Kromenhoek so far this year, though Kromenhoek has had more true big-time throws, we'll say, than Glenn has. Looking at Glenn on the big-time throw metric and the standard metrics that I mentioned before, he's got 4 big-time throws on the year and 5 turnover-worthy plays. If you want to know why Luke Kromenhoek has essentially taken the job for this last game, and you want to know why the coaching staff is more bullish on his future, despite the fact that he's taken double the sack rate on pressures, it's that. Brock Glenn, 4 big-time throws, a 3.3% big-time throw percentage, and more turnover-worthy plays than he's had big-time throw opportunities on the season. And you compare that to Kromenhoek, and it's just a whole different world. Kromenhoek with a 12% big-time throw percentage, and again, around the same number of turnover-worthy plays. That's your difference. Now, the question is, can Kromenhoek actually feel the pressure and get the ball out on time, and then can Florida State actually make that pay off? Can they catch the football? So much of this year has been that mismatch of quarterbacks getting sacked, even when the quarterback gets the ball out, the ball gets dropped, so on. Can they string some things together just a little bit? Can they have pulled some things together from some of the positives that happened against Charleston Southern? Again, I don't know, but that they're going to have that in order for this to pay off in the least, in order for them to have a shot against Florida, which is, again, crazy to say, given where things started on the season. But I don't see a bunch of success on the ground. Although, again, one of the things that Florida is huge inside, but they're not the most mobile on the defensive line. So maybe you can get them stretched a little bit, get them a little bit on the perimeter. That's where you may be able to have some success, but. Ultimately, to me, this game boils down to Florida has had a pretty darn good offensive line on the season. Florida State has had one of the worst offensive lines in the country this season. Florida's young quarterback has managed to find his feet a little bit behind that offensive line, where he's managed to gain some comfort and to make some of the throws that you expect a big time recruit to make. Florida State hasn't really had a chance to get their quarterbacks comfortable because of all the problems there. So again, this is one of those games where I just don't see it. I don't see Florida State having a bunch of success. If things go as you would expect, I'm going to say Florida State loses this game, most likely something like 27 to 9. Maybe a few field goals here, maybe a turnover, something like that. But I'm going to go with 27 to 9. Florida State loses to rival Florida to wrap up the worst season Florida State has had since the mid-'70s. And then we can all mercifully get to the postseason where lots more changes are going to be made. And I'll talk about that on the other side of the break. Okay, so I'm going to get to some mailbag stuff. First of all, I do want to just mention, from all accounts that I've gotten, we are going to see Brennan Marion as the Florida State offensive coordinator next year. So go offense likely coming to Tallahassee. Right now, I know I mentioned last episode that it would be hard to take Marion against the whole field in terms of likelihood of becoming the coordinator. But at this point, I would make that bet. I would say Marion is you bet Marion over the field for a variety of reasons. From what I'm told, he's going to be coming in coaching quarterbacks, and that they will be hiring a separate receivers coach to come with him. But the question is whether or not they're going to bring in another quarterback coach as well, an analyst type who then will actually coach the quarterbacks in practice in terms of drills and things like that, which is something that I would hope for. If you are bringing Marion in as the quarterbacks coach, I still want a quarterbacks whisperer who is working drills and doing that sort of thing to really try to improve the level of fundamentals from your quarterback group. That's not to say that Marion can't do that. I'm just not as sold on him as a quarterback whisperer as much as some others. So maybe you bring in a Kevin Johns as your de facto quarterback coach for drills and things like that, while Marion is your quarterback / OC and kind of runs the whole offense in that way. I don't know exactly what they're going to do there, but again, I expect it to be Brennan Marion on the at the offensive coordinator spot. Defensive coordinator, I don't actually have any clear information of late, so we'll just wait to find out there. But I do think they have a very good sense of who that's going to be. And, again, a lot of these things are going to be in place relatively soon after the season, though, again, might have to wait until after the conference title games for some of that. So let's go ahead and get to some mailbag questions after that. So first one, let's see. It says, most studied and astute FSU fans realize this is a historic collapse due to a plethora of reasons. Nice use of the word plethora. But it is not as epic if not for the offensive line. An average offensive line, and you're probably 7-5. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise because at 7-5, we may not see the needed wholesale changes to truly bring us back to elite status. And it gave Norvell the wake-up call. He was willingly looking past out of probably loyalty and resting on laurels. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, that part's not right. The loyalty and resting on laurels, no. But anyway, question goes on. My theory on why the O-line regressed to high school level play has come down to complacent coaching and returners beat to hell from years of injuries and wear and tear. It started to show in 2023 with the ineffective short yardage play, meaning just a standard block now is just a physical hurdle each play for each offensive lineman. For instance, maybe Smith is snapping high because of the notion that he physically can't get in position as fast and is not as strong as he once was. As on top of coaching that tells each play, I don't know what that means. What have you in your theory on the incredible regression of play from proven linemen? So I think it's a couple of factors. One is I do think that the wear and tear from certain guys being pressed into play when they were younger, before they were ready, and then not being able to develop has been a major factor. So if you look at Smith, you look at Darius Washington, who's been banged up all season. You look at Rob Scott, who has been a shell of himself since he got hurt. You look at a lot of those guys, and they're just not at the level that you would like them to be this late in their careers. And a lot of that is because they did get banged up and because they didn't develop physically the way that you would hope they would. Now, that's not all of it, though. I don't think that this is just a matter of that. I think that there's also a coaching and accountability component to this. And I do think you can kind of trace the drop-off in offensive line play to the time when Atkins took over the offensive coordinator job. Once he started coordinating and coaching the offensive line, I think you started to see some diminishing fundamentals there from that group, and that has been a factor, I think, since. Now, that isn't, I think, the only answer, because I also think you're dealing with some misses in the transfer portal. They were at their best when they got Dylan Gibbons from Notre Dame, who came in really prepared as an offensive lineman to come in. Now, he played injured a lot, but in terms of fundamentals, in terms of just nastiness and fight, he brought a lot to the table. I think Byers has regressed since he got to campus. You look at what he does sometimes, and it's just absolutely baffling. And physically speaking, he just doesn't look as impressive as what you would expect at this stage. He looks to me, Byers looks to me like a guy who's, and I don't know if the moon's still around in Tallahassee, but he looks to me like a guy who spent a bunch of time, sitting at the moon in late night hours, maybe having a little bit of a few beverages, I'll say. That's what he looks like. He looks like a guy who's really enjoyed the nightlife in Tallahassee and hasn't put in the work. And I think there's been a decent amount of that on that offensive front. But then you look at some of the other things, and it's just a matter of misses in the transfer portal. Or in one case, I think they hit in the transfer portal with a transfer from Florida, but it didn't really matter because he got hurt in the second game. Richie Leonard was their best interior offensive lineman in the first couple games, and then he goes down. And after that, they've really just struggled on the interior. Ferguson from Alabama really didn't turn into anything. They just haven't had some of the players inside that you'd want. So I think some of it is development. Some of it is accountability and fundamentals. Some of it is accountability in terms of, is this guy, out at night, enjoying the nightlife, or is he putting in the work? And then some of it is, I think, the difference in terms of attention from the position coach during the most important parts of practice, in terms of those fundamentals, just certain things being tolerated. And my mantra as a coach is you get what you tolerate, and I think they've just tolerated too much. And I don't see enough correction happening on certain things that, whoever comes in as the next offensive line coach, as the next offensive coordinator, whatever, the main thing you're going to have to see is a lack of tolerance for any rep that is less than optimal. And I'm talking about off-season conditioning. I'm talking about in practice. You can't just let guys do the rep and then just move on to the next thing if they're not doing it perfectly. It's the old saying, you don't do it until you can get it right. You do it until you can't get it wrong. And that's not been the approach, I think, too much at that position and just in general. And that's why we're seeing the results that we have. Okay, so next question. In a recent podcast, you took some players to task for their NIL renegotiations during the offseason. My question is whether Norvell created the context for this self-centeredness, for the lack of a better word, by using the interest from Alabama to negotiate a better deal for himself at a time when many players are psychologically fragile. He could have promoted a different program environment consistent with the culture he had built by claiming he had not yet accomplished what he set out to do at Florida State and would not entertain other offers or renegotiate his current contract, which paid him quite well, instead of sending the message to players that I got mine, so you get yours, especially in the light of the post-snub fallout. Thanks. So do I think that's the case? Not really. I do think that when a coach is courted by another program and you have something like that, it can have some impact. But keep in mind that Norvell's primary negotiating point was to get more money for NIL. That was the primary thing that he fought for in terms of those negotiations, was to get more commitment from Florida State in terms of NIL. So, I don't think that that's it. I think really the bigger thing is that basically it was just tolerated inside the athletic department to let guys take that approach. And I think what you have to do is you have to start setting the table of, here's our cap, here's what you're worth to us, and if that's really what matters to you most, you can go elsewhere. And I know that sounds ridiculous because you are going to lose guys there, but I think at a certain point, there are the guys that you absolutely have to keep. Your Jared Verses of the world. Like, if that guy's getting a big offer from somewhere else and, there's tampering going on, and he comes to you and says, look, this is what I'm getting from this other school. This is the offer I'm getting. Then, you deal with those guys on a trust basis, and you deal with them as they come to you, and you say, okay, look, I get it, and you're worth that to us with that guy, because he's put in the work, he's been that leader. With guys who aren't that, with guys who've been a bit of a problem, and some of those guys had already been a bit of a problem before that. I mean, I mentioned a few of those guys, but a few of those guys had held out multiple times in the past, essentially. This was not stimulated by Norvell doing, entertaining interest from Alabama. This was something that they had to deal with last spring. This was something they had to deal with in the summer. And then it happened again after the season, and you're going, okay, this is the third time in a calendar year for a couple of these guys that you've had to deal with this. That's not due to a coach. That's just due to these guys being that kind of guy. And when those guys have been a bit of a locker room problem to begin with in the past, and you're hoping that maybe they turn over another leaf on that, well, you can't count on that. That's happened already. You know what their track record is. At that point, you just say, you know what? I'm going to wash my hands of you. You're not good enough to allow your cultural problems, the problems you bring to the locker room, to fester. Now, it's easy to say in hindsight, because frankly, given a couple of these guys and how important those positions are to you, I probably would have done the same thing. That said, I also think you absolutely have to make sure that you are holding those guys accountable in practice, and with the remainder of your staff. You have to find ways to unrecruit them once the money stuff is taken care of. And again, that's the part that I don't think was handled well enough by this staff, and that's the stuff that I think needs to be fixed for next year. So, yeah. Okay, final question of this show, and we'll go ahead and do it now. If Brendan Marion is a new offensive coordinator, I've got some concerns if we convert to his style of offense. It just seems a little gimmicky. I've always thought of Florida State as a major power. We traditionally win by overwhelming others with athletes. If we go to the go-go offense, it seems like we are playing as if we are an Army or Navy team. I just question the optics, and other teams will eventually figure it out. Plus, how many great athletes will want to be a part of an offense that isn't run by others? You'll eventually have to transition back to a more traditional offense if you move on. Is this a naive worry by me? Yeah, I do think it's a little bit naive, because the go-go offense is not the flex bone. This is not, your triple option type stuff that you're getting that is completely different from everything else. All you're dealing with the go-go offense is more two-back sets compared to what most teams are doing. So put it this way. In college football, the last 15 years, 11 personnel has been sort of the default. So that's 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end. 1 tight end, 1 back. And that's been kind of the personnel default, and it's mostly been an H-back, a detached tight end that kind of moves around, and he's kind of a hybrid fullback / tight end player that you just kind of move around as needed. And, that's been really common. Now, you're also starting to see the 1 back, 2 tight formation, so 21 personnel, 2 tights, 1 back, where you have oftentimes 1 inline tight end and then 1 H-back, which is similar in a lot of ways to the old school fullback type situation. But again, you have that is more of an H-back, a little closer to the line of scrimmage than a traditional fullback, but it's pretty similar. What Marion's doing is he's going with more true two-back stuff. So essentially, your 12 personnel, so one tight end, two backs, or your 0-2 personnel, so 0-2 personnel, which is essentially your three wide receiver, two back situation, and you're getting those looks more in his offense. That's really the biggest difference, along with one other thing, and that's that he's changing up formation to often put those two backs on the same side in the shotgun. So instead of having split backs, one on each side of the quarterback, all he's doing is he's putting both backs on one side of the quarterback, so that you've got better angles in certain cases for certain triple option type looks and some things out of that. Plus, it just forces some problems in terms of how the defense calculates numbers and where they put the strength and all of that. So he'll put four guys in the boundary with two backs on one side of the quarterback and then two receivers into the boundary. So you've got four into the boundary. The defense now has to decide whether they want to defend the boundary hard or whether they want to defend the field. And then once they've figured that out, then you've got to figure out how they're going to sift based on what you're going to do from that formation. So he's just basically trying to change the numbers a little bit and force defenses to more unbalanced looks, so that they declare where their coverage is going to be, they declare where the pressure is going to come from, and then he's got some advantages in terms of some angles for running some option type stuff. But this is your standard spread option stuff. This is actually, it's more comparable to the sorts of stuff that Dan Mullen and Urban Meyer ran for years at Florida and at Ohio State when Meyer was there. But especially at Florida, it's the Dan Mullen, Urban Meyer type offense at Florida, where you're going to get Percy Harvin as essentially a second running back with the way that they used him, who's also a wide receiver. And this is the kind of offense that would be really ideal for a player like Mekhi Danzy, for example, who's kind of a hybrid running back wide receiver, but is really just a super fast dynamic player. He then becomes the kind of Percy Harvin player in that system. He becomes the guy that you put as that second running back, who oftentimes lines up as the one to the outside. And so you have your bigger back, your Cam Davis, right next to the quarterback, and then a yard or 2 yards outside him, you have your smaller back, your faster back out there, and you're using him on wheel routes. You're using him in the passing game. He's just lined up a little further in the backfield, and then you're also doing all sorts of pitch game and different option stuff with him that just puts the defense at a little bit of a disadvantage. So that's basically what the go-go offense has been. That's not the same as, completely changing your blocking structure, going to your flexbone style blocking systems and all of that. Marion is running the same blocking schemes and the same basic schemes in general up front and overall, even in the passing game, that Norvell runs. So, you look at UNLV's passing game, and it's more or less the same kind of concepts that Norvell has run since he's been at Florida State. It's not really that different of an offense. All that Marion's doing differently is essentially running more two back and then going with the old West Coast offense style near far formations in the backfield, where you've got, the backfield is not balanced. It's not an I formation or true split back or pro set. It's the near far from the West Coast offense. It's been done before. It's been used a lot. It's just not been used out of the shotgun before, and that's really the innovation. Yeah, our team's going to figure it out, sure, but the basic concepts are sound. The basic ideas are there, and the thing is, it's just not hard to shift from that. If something's not working, you just move to taking that second running back and you motion him into the slot, and all of a sudden you're in a standard formation that everybody runs. So it's really not that different. You're just using it to gain some advantages in certain cases. I do think having a quarterback who's able to read that and be a threat with his legs is more of a plus in that kind of offense, because of how much Marion has run his quarterback in the past. So I think that does change that a little bit. But in general, it's just not that big of a change, even though it is a change. So, is this the hire that I would have made? I've been pretty clear that he would not have been my first choice, but I've also been pretty clear that I have no objection with Marion as a hire, and he seems to be a good coach, and the offense schematically is sound and very much is the same type of offense, even with a lot of the same terminology as what Norvell's running. I suspect they'll actually just use Norvell's terminology, and that basically not that much is going to change other than, some which formations they run the most and, which personnel groupings they're using. So you'll see a little bit less in the way of tight end usage, though you'll still see tight ends. You'll still see that, but you're going to see more two-back stuff in the go-go than you would otherwise. And that's the primary difference. And so some of those hybrid guys, your Danzies of the world, those guys will have more of a role in this type of offense. But no, I don't think it's super gimmicky, at least based on what I've looked at on it so far. And, is it my preference? Not really, but I can see the appeal of it, especially for a guy like Norvell who wants to run the football and wants to emphasize running the football. This is much more of a urban Dan Mullen type spread option type offense than it is, the kind of option offense that you'd be worried about with that sort of thing. So I'll go ahead and wrap there. As always, thanks to my sponsors. Thanks to everybody over at Patreon. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. Thanks for listening. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating over at Apple Podcasts and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Post and repost episodes on social media and tell a friend. And if you haven't left a review in a while, do it again. It really does help the visibility of the podcast. Before we go, I'd also like to thank my advertising partners once more. That's EPR Creations, Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky. You can also stop by the Unconquered Shop at unconqueredpodcast.com, where you can buy stickers, pins, magnets, t-shirts, and other swag. I am especially grateful for those of you at the Dynasty level. That is Brian Leininger, Dave Blair, Jack Horton, Jonathan Kennedy, Lee Caswell, Travis Smith, and Tyler Kashishki. You all are far more generous than I deserve. Thanks to you all. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Jason Staples. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support. I made this.